For 60 years, she loved him. She had never missed a day. She looked at him, sitting in his favourite chair in front of the TV. He was sleeping, feet up in the recliner, a paper by his side, the one she still ordered, but he hadn't been able to read for some time. The dementia was real. She didn't like to think about it, but it couldn't be escaped. But also, it didn't matter, for he was her man, and she would love him till his dying day. As she sat there, watching him sleep, she thought back to their younger days, the days when she first met him, down that terrace street. She had been 12. Her brother's football had gone over the fence, into the yard of the house that backed onto theirs. She had made her way to that street, and when she knocked on that door, the most beautiful thing she had ever seen opened the door and smiled at her. A tall 15-year-old boy, blue eyes and thick brown hair, soft with perfect teeth. After that day, they would talk over the wall at the bottom of their yards every night. Her on a chair under the stars at midnight, as her mother didn't want her speaking to him. But as the mother listened to the words drift through her bedroom window, she knew he was a good boy, and she could not help but fall in love with what was blossoming between them. Soon they was allowed to come out in the day, and the whole street, by the end of the summer, knew they were sweethearts. Her wedding day at 17 had been perfect. She remembered the church bells and the cheers as they had walked hand in hand. She would have been the envy of every girl in the street if only she hadn't been so sweet herself. To be near them was to be near life itself. When she had given birth to Charlotte, he had held her close, held her hand tight. He had been with her all the way. For the 40 years after, he had been with her all the way. But now, though he struggled from time to time, where was this and where was that? They were still together. To their dying day, she thought, as she listened to him begin to snore. She woke to an orange light spilling into the living room, and the BBC newsreader telling the headlines she didn't care about. It was time for tea, and he was still there, sleeping. She got up from her own chair and walked towards the kitchen, her steps more tentative, balance more wayward than it was only 6 months ago. Shepherd's pie was on the menu tonight. It had always been his favourite. She did everything in the house now. She'd complained she had for 40 years. But now, she really did everything. She even brushed his teeth, shaved him. He would still wipe himself after going to the toilet, but she wondered when that day would come. She got out the ingredients from the fridge and placed them on the worktop, then opened the cupboard below her to get out the right pots and pans. Getting down was tough, but she managed, reaching for a big pan. It was getting up that was the real hard bit. As she did, she went to put her hand on top of the cupboard door to help her up, but her hand missed and she fell forward, hitting her head hard on the kitchen worktop. When she woke, it was dark, and she could hear the BBC newsreader, this time reading the 10 o'clock news from the living room. As she touched her head, it felt damp, blood. "Harold! Harold! Come here, dear!" She could hear him coming down the stairs. God knows what he'd been doing up there, without her careful watch. "I'm in the kitchen, darling. Come help me. I can't move." She heard him shuffling into the room, in the dark, with his mumbling she had grown accustomed to. "Harold, I'm on the floor. Come help me, dear," she said. He shuffled around the kitchen, finding his way to the kitchen worktop, finding the food she had put there hours earlier. And she began to listen to him eat. He ruffled and ate at the raw onion, then started on the mince. "Harold, no! Stop that! Get me the phone, please!"
"Mary! Mary! Where are you? Mary! For Christ's sake!"
he said, going back to eating.
"Harold! Give me the phone. I'm right here. Mary! Mary!
Mary laid there till the next evening. When the sunlight spilled into the kitchen, she had woke to find Harold above her, rummaging through the fridge. But he was somehow still oblivious to her being there. She looked at the feces all over his hand, and then the smell hit her. "Please, not like this," she said, laying her head on the floor, beginning to cry. It was dark when she heard the front door come crashing down. The next thing she heard was grunts and cries coming from her husband, a struggle in the corridor.
Mary Saunders? Miss Saunders, are you here? Right, take him down. Get out of here!
There was a huge crash.
Harold! Don't hurt him, please! Don't hurt him, he doesn't understand!
Cried Mary as she heard heavy boots come into the kitchen. "You're going to be okay, Mary. With the police and the paramedics are here. Who is that man?"
"He's my husband. Is he okay?"
"He's fine. We just need to make sure you're okay." Suddenly the room became painfully bright, and the paramedics were looking at a bloody Mary. "You've lost a lot of blood, my love. You'll be dehydrated too. We're going to get you to hospital as soon as we can. We just need to make a few checks first."
"Is my husband okay?"
said Mary. For 3 days, she laid in a hospital bed attached to a drip, feeding her fluids and salts. The hospital staff had been kind and courteous, despite how much she had asked for her Harold. She was told her hip was broken, and it was to be arranged by a nurse that soon she would be in the care home with her husband. She didn't ask or pry to why they were not operating. She knew she was no young lady anymore. Just first and foremost, she wanted to be with her husband, and living in the same place as him. So she kept shush and waited for that to happen, knowing how much the NHS was stretched. This bed was on a premium. They would want her out, and this care home would want her in. More money in their back pocket. She was taken in something like an ambulance, but not an ambulance. 2 kind people dressed in green were with her. A woman about 50 sat in the back and held her hand, and kept telling her everything would be fine soon, lovely. And a big 20-something-year-old man was sat in the front, sipping on an energy drink, driving. Mary at first had thought it was alcohol, but he seemed in high spirits. She arrived at the care home and was taken into her room. A window, a 12-inch TV on a cabinet, and an ensuite. Not that she'd be using that anytime soon. The 2 dressed in green, with help from the care staff, put a board underneath her and slid her onto the bed, pulling up the railings on each side, locking her in.
We don't want you falling out now, do we, lovely?"
said an orange girl with too much fake tan and dyed black hair that looked awful. She had said it right in her face, and Mary could smell the cigarette. She tried her best to smile, but it came out all strange, like a grimace.
"Nice to meet you, Mary,"
said the 2 ambulance drivers, but not ambulance drivers. For some reason, she wanted them to immediately come back. A small Indian girl picked up a white plastic bag. Her clothes were in it, at the end of the bed, and she looked at it.
"That it?"
said the girl with the faggy breath.
"Fuck's sake. Just sling him in that cupboard. All right?"
she said. Her tone had changed dramatically, as soon as the 2 in green had disappeared.
"Can I get a cup of tea? I'm rather thirsty,"
said Mary.
"Tea trolley ain't out till 5 now. You've missed it. You come at a bloody awkward time, to be honest. They always bring him at this time, at dinner," said the girl.
"Where's Harold?" said Mary.
"Who?"
"My husband. Apparently he's here at this care home."
"Dunno.
Never fucking heard of him," she said, looking at her colleague, who was putting away Mary's clothes. The Indian girl looked over her shoulder towards them. "Isn't that the new man? The one they've been having trouble with?"
"Oh, yeah, him. The one that smacked Tom," she said, cackling.
"My Harold would never do that."
"Yeah, all right then," said the girl,
throwing the call bell on the bed and taking a second look at the room. "What's that?" said Mary.
"It's your call bell. Press it if you need us, but don't be pressing it every 5 minutes, all right? Can I see Harold? She's going to be one of them, isn't she? Said the girl, looking at the Indian girl, who smiled a very sweet smile. We'll see you in a bit, Mary. Mary looked around the room. Nothingness. The TV was off. The window looked at a wall 6 feet away, and the walls were white, and her mouth was very, very dry. When Mary woke, the room was mostly dark. She looked at the little red thing on her bed with a wire in the wall and the button on top, and she pressed the button. Within 5 minutes, a girl came. She didn't come in. She stood at the door in a coat. The hallway light cast her in shadow. What is it? Said the silhouette. Can I see Harold? It came out croaky. It was surprisingly hard to say. No, not now, lovely. You're going to have to wait for tomorrow now. Okay, well, can I at least get a drink? The girl looked at her watch and sighed. Look, my shift's about to finish. You'll just have to wait for the night staff, okay? I haven't had a drink all day, love. Please, said Mary. Look, I'll pass it on to the night staff. It's the first thing they do. They'll be in within like 5 minutes. I'm going to have to go. Night, love, said the silhouette, drifting down the corridor. Mary waited. She wanted to close her eyes, but she knew falling asleep now would be dangerous. She needed a drink. But she didn't want to press the call bell again. She didn't want to bother people more than she had. She didn't want to get a name. She didn't want to be one of them. She heard the metal tea trolley approaching. The 2 members of care staff were on the night shift, chattering away, working their way down the corridor, making their stops in each room. They sounded young. A guy talking to a girl far too much. She could tell he liked her, and she probably didn't like him, as she wasn't saying much back. At the very least, she didn't excite him. And they went straight past her room, not even a look. Mary pressed the call bell, and then heard, What the? It's number 23. 23. Shall I just turn it off? Said the girl. That's strange. One sec. She heard the heavy footsteps of the young man. He peered in, and Mary could make out long unkempt hair. Shit, there's someone in here. Why didn't they tell us? Can I please get a cup of tea? Said Mary. Yeah. Should we just quickly check her while we're here? Get her done? Said the young man. Yeah, cool, said the girl, walking round the other side of the bed. She whipped back Mary's sheet and pushed her, rolling her over and pressing her hand into the broken hip, and Mary screamed. Wow, what the fuck? There's no need for that, said the girl. My hip! It's broken! 1 second. Yeah, she's dry, said the girl, letting go of Mary, who fell back onto her back and began to cry. Just give her a drink, Tom, said the girl, walking out. Mary hadn't even seen her face. Tom stood above her at the bedside. You okay? No. I don't want to be here. I want to go home. I'm sorry, love, but this is your home now. How'd you have your tea? Mary just cried. Come on, how'd you have your tea? I've got to go. Mary managed to calm herself, sniffling, and said, Milk, no sugar. She watched him in the light of the corridor, making her cup of tea from the teapot on the metal trolley just outside her room. She could see his face more clearly. He had a handsome face, spoiled by a weak beard and unkempt brown hair. A shave, a good haircut, and to lose a couple pounds. He'd be very handsome indeed, she thought. All he needed was to believe in himself. She could also see the bruise on his eye. He came back in. The tea was in a small, clear plastic cup with the spout on top. He put it on her bedside table, that was on wheels, and pushed it over her bed. There you go. Night. Mary didn't say a thing. She just wanted to cry again. He didn't even help her sit up. She was alone in her room, looking at the half-full cup of tea with the spout, like it was for a baby. She couldn't sit up.
She didn't have the strength. She reached for the beaker, but it was difficult, and she knocked it over, and it fell on the bed. The hot liquid seeped through the bedsheets and began to burn her legs. She tried to reach for the call bell. Where was it? She couldn't find it. The care staff hadn't given it back to her. She didn't cry out. She didn't have the energy. She closed her eyes and fell to sleep.
Mary.
It was distant. The room was light, but she could barely open her eyes.
Mary.
It came again. It was hard to breathe.
Mary.
It was louder now. Harold.
Mary.
It was just outside her room. Harold. Appearing above her bed was his face, the man she had loved all her life, and he smiled so sweetly. She saw her reason. Gently, his hand touched her face, and slowly his head came down, and his lips touched the top of her head, and she heard his kiss, and a tear fell from her eye. Harold, she said, closing her eyes and smiling. Harold, she said again, letting out her last breath.
Oh, for God, what's he doing in here? Get him back on his unit.
Mary hadn't heard that. Her heart had stopped, but with a smile on her face.
So, I was able to ride that from working in care work for about 10 years. It was always a job that I found meaning in, suited me, felt like it had a purpose, something bigger, actually helping people really spoke to me, I guess. But the job certainly isn't easy, and if you walk into most care homes now, the staff inside them won't be English, and it's the care staff that I'm talking of. Why do I say unfortunate? Well, why can't we find people to work in our own care homes, our own people in society, to look after our own people? Like, what's happening? In the UK now, we're essentially relying on foreign labour to come and look after our most needy in society. And these people aren't coming in because they want to look after people, they're coming in because they want to live in the UK, which I understand, but it's not for the right reasons. So why don't people want to work in care homes in the UK? Well, let me tell you a little story about me. It was in that care home there, several months ago, maybe 6 months ago, that I was fired from a job. It's called Drover's Call Care Home in Gainsborough, the largest care home in Gainsborough probably. And yeah, I was fired from it. And why, you ask? Because I was fired and found myself in a police station for stopping a man from biting me. And in that is the reason why you cannot find people in our own communities to staff these places, because the job's becoming untenable. People will blame low wages, but it's not about low wages. It's just the way the care staff are treated, absolutely no respect. Other jobs with that pay minimum wage, they're not struggling to employ people. People are desperate for work, but people won't go to work in care homes these days because it's hard work where you are not respected as a member of staff. Just all the rights have been taken away from them, and it's very tough. People are out to get you. You literally, in my situation, worked in care 10 years, put my hand in the wrong place, and now I can't work in care. And they tried to put me on a barring list. So this is how people are getting treated in the care industry, and then people are wondering why can't we employ people? And it's happening a lot. A BBC report recently, I saw it on 6 o'clock news, about people with learning difficulties. A young girl had to stay in hospital, and why can't we find somewhere for this girl? Why is there no places? And the care companies were saying we can't find the staff. Well, because you're not treating the staff with any respect, so no one wants to do it. What happens is people work in these places for a few months, 6 months to a year, they get burnt out and then they don't go back to them. And a care company will go through everyone in the community that are willing to do it, that they think they can get to do it, and they get into a point now where there's no one left in the community, so they're having to rely on the foreign labour. And my point is, this isn't tenable, is it? Things need to change. Anyway, what's your point, Kieran? What are you trying to get at? Well, basically in a hyper-capitalised society where money has become our most precious commodity, places like this are going to suffer. Money won't fix these places.
higher wages won't, but what will, I think, is making the working conditions more viable for staff, keeping staff retention. You're only going to have staff retention if you make the job plausible, possible for people. Anyway, I just thought it'd be good to get it off my chest, and a apt time to do it since I wrote that story. Hopefully I'll go back to care one day, because I actually sort of miss it. Maybe just part-time or something. But anyway, hope you enjoyed that story. Hope the rant wasn't too monotonous or disengaging. And yeah, see you next time. If you want to stick around, stick around.